Hey guys, Dan Williams from Range of Motion Nutrition Coaching, which will be launching in January 2019. Check out the nutrition page on our website for any early details. Guys, today I want to talk about the importance of something called Keystone habits. That is the habits that determine all other habits in your life. It can be really difficult to create behavior change. And if we look at trying to change 1,000 things in our life, it's overwhelming. It's not going to work. And it takes too much effort because each one of those little changes takes a little bit of your willpower, takes a little bit of your mental energy. However, what if we could find one or two of these habits, which, if done correctly, cause these others to happen automatically? What if we could put all these other habits on autopilot just by using a little bit of our willpower to focus on some of these keystone habits? So firstly, why are they called keystone habits? Well, originally it's a term that comes from architecture. And when you're building a stone arch, that little slither of stone at the top, that little end piece of wedge that goes in to that archway is the keystone. And it's a keystone because it holds up the arch. So as we build this arch out of stones, if we don't have that final little wedge at the top, the whole thing will collapse. So of course, from a habit formation, from a psychological, from a mental skills training perspective, a keystone habit is a habit that if we have that present, all the other habits are supported. So what I'd like to do, guys, is do a little bit of a case study and talk to you about a keystone habit or a couple of keystone habits which we've implemented with a client that I've been working with to improve some of their nutritional habits. So this client works in a high stress environment. He's in a white collar job and he's responsible for a large team of people. Now, he travels a lot for his work. He travels a lot interstate. We've had some real successes and some real changes in his habits, his nutritional practices when he's at home. So when he's at home, he's in his standard work environment. We've got some really good habits in place. However, the issue began to arise when he would go interstate, which he'd do every month for a week or longer. And when he'd go interstate, he wouldn't be able to transfer some of these positive habits. He'd find that he was not eating healthy, he was not keeping his hydration up, his sleep patterns were being disrupted because of the time difference. So what we did is we looked at not just at what was going incorrectly, what was going wrong when he was traveling, but we looked at what was going right when he wasn't traveling. And we identified a couple of key things that if he did them, everything else would fall into place. So let me give you the before. This is what was happening before we started to implement some of these keystone habits. He'd go to the airport. At the airport, after check-in, while he was waiting for his flight, he'd have a couple of glasses of wine. He'd catch the flight, he'd land, and because he had some alcohol in his system, he wasn't able to get to sleep. So he'd be there in his hotel room, he couldn't get to sleep, he'd stay up and watch TV until late and probably have some unhealthy snacks as he went. Of course, the time difference, the lack of sleep because he'd gone to bed later, meant that when he woke up, he'd only had 4, 5, 6 hours sleep. So his mental willpower was starting to be depleted. He was fatigued, which is exactly the same reason that maybe you eat really well early in the day, but later in the day you don't eat so well because that willpower muscle has been fatigued. So he'd wake up in the morning, he'd eat something maybe that was not ideal because his willpower was already low. He was tired. He didn't have the time to allocate to maybe preparing some food, and he'd go throughout the day and the dominoes would just collapse, not in a positive way. But what if we could create that first domino that instead of going down a negative path, took him down a positive path? Now you remember this whole thing stemmed from him having a couple of glasses of wine at the airport. So we went right back to that keystone habit and we said, let's see what happens if we take away those glasses of wine. So on the last trip he had, which he's just got back from, he didn't have that wine at the airport. What it meant is that he got to his destination and he got to bed on time. When he woke up, his willpower muscle wasn't depleted because he wasn't tired and fatigued. He was able to get up a little earlier because he'd had his full sleep. He didn't have all those negative snacks the night before, able to get up earlier, prepare some food, and that set him on his way. Now, the second keystone habit, which kicked in on the morning, is at home where we have a bright spot where things are going really well. He'd have a bulletproof coffee every morning. Now, whether that's a valid way to eat or not, or to start the day or not, is a whole nother matter. But he'd have this bulletproof coffee, which is coffee with some melted butter in it. What this was doing, because of the fat content in the butter, it was causing a release of leptin in his body, which is a hormone which would make him feel full. So by having that, he was able to then not snack throughout the day. He'd get to lunchtime, and as soon as he got to lunch, then he'd be back on track with his healthy eating. So again, 2 keystone habits. Quite simply, not having those couple of glasses of wine at the airport and then having that coffee there ready to go in the morning. By doing that, instead of going down that negative path of dominoes, he went down that positive path of dominoes and was able to create a whole chain of habits from this, which meant that instead of it being a very negative experience, a week of poor eating, of suboptimal eating, we were then able to create from these 2 keystone habits some real positive behavior change. And like I said, it's been a great success. So have a look at your life and see if you can identify some areas where maybe you can tweak some keystone habits. A good thing to look out for is if you're doing something negative which is taking you away from your goals, these poor habits are often linked to a certain mood that you're in, to a certain environment that you're in, to a certain time of day. A lot of these negative habits are linked to something else. So look at what that something else is. Maybe if you're trying to quit smoking, every time you go to the pub and have a beer, you have a cigarette as well. It's not that you need that cigarette, it's that it's linked to another behavior. Maybe when you get home from work, you feel like you need to have an unhealthy snack. It's not because you're hungry, it's because your body is conditioned to you getting home from work, it being a certain environment, that being arriving at home, and a certain time, maybe you get home at 6 o'clock. And these are these more negative cornerstone habits, and then everything falls apart from there. So identify where these are in your life, maybe just 1 or 2 key things. And if you get these right, everything else will fall into place. Thanks guys, hope this has been of some use to you guys. Any questions, please post below, or you can email me at dan@rangeofmotion.net.au. If you're interested in Range of Motion nutrition coaching, launching January 2019, rangeofmotion.net.au, and follow the links to Range of Motion Nutrition. Thanks guys, I'll see you again soon.